Welcome, everyone. My name is Gail Fast, and I'm a program analyst at the Office of Advisory Neighborhood Commissions. I am joined today, and please wave, by my colleagues, Kathy Williams, who is the Special Assistant to the Executive Director, Dawn Dickerson, who's a Program Manager, Leonard Barnum, Program Analyst, and behind the scenes, Ronald Gaither, our IT Specialist. Interim Executive Director Shanique Grant may also be online. But today's new commissioner training is being presented by our new Executive Director, Ken Bass. We are very excited. He has joined our team and to offer this training. It's pretty remarkable that 10 years ago, after the 2010 census, we onboarded only one ANC, and that was 5E. This time around, there are 6 new ANCs, 1E, 2G, 3A, 4E, 5F, and 8F. So a lot is happening. So at this point in time, I will turn it over to Executive Director Bass.
Thank you, Gail. I appreciate that introduction. It almost feels like a lot of weight on my shoulders. It was so kind. But anyway, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be part of this team. In the short month that I've been in this office, I can attest that we have an excellent and dedicated staff and that you are all in very good hands. One of the reasons for today's session, which is only about an hour and a half, is that, as Gail alluded to, we have 6 completely new commissions, which have unique challenges and considerations that need to be addressed so that you can be up and running as quickly as possible when we get into 2023. Just for the rules of the day, I am going to show a brief PowerPoint to go over some of the bullets. If you have questions, feel free to use the chat or raise your hand. And when we're done with the PowerPoint, we will then have a quick Q&A session. I don't assume that we're going to cover, how do I put this? I don't assume the PowerPoint will answer all of your questions, but I do know that we can answer your questions. And so therefore we want to know what they are. With that said, let me pull up the PowerPoint. Let's see. I believe I can share. And if you all can confirm, Gail, that you're seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Perfect.
We are.
That's always one of my biggest fears in life, is that the technology won't do what the technology is supposed to do.
Yes.
Let's see, I'll hide that. And there we go. So hopefully this is expanded to full screen. We've already done introductions, and what we are going to do today is go over the ANC playbook. Hopefully you all have a copy. It was attached to the invitation of today's meeting. If you do not, don't worry. We will be sending it out again with the recording of today's discussion. I would like to acknowledge that the playbook was created in collaboration with the Advisory Committee of OANC, to OANC for Services, ACTOS. They were very involved. They did a great job in reviewing the work and making recommendations and submitting text. And it was a wonderful collaboration. So I do want to give them kudos for that. So just for our outline today, we're going to go over things to do at the first ANC meeting, conducting meetings, the officers and governing documents, ANC meeting documents and notice, money and financial reporting, constituent engagement, and support, help, and training that you can expect from this office. So since we're focusing on brand new commissions that are not previously existing ANCs, we've split things into things that you must do because you're new. Some of these things you wouldn't need to do if you were an existing commission, and then something that you may want to do. So because you're a startup ANC and you do not have a continuing ANC, you do not currently have officers. So one of the first things you're going to do, or actually the first thing you're going to need to do, is appoint a chairperson pro tem to convene the meeting. I would recommend that one of the first orders of business would be to do the elections so that you do have officers. When you elect your officers, according to Robert's rules, upon election, service is immediate. So once the election is over, the officers that you've just elected are all officially in their offices, and then the chair can take over the meeting reins and start to convene the meeting themselves. You will want to adopt your bylaws, and we can go over that in a little bit more detail, but keep in mind that bylaws are binding. To change them, it requires a 2/3 majority vote. So they are not simple to change. And once you've adopted bylaws, if you want to make amendments in the future, you need to announce them at the meeting prior to the action of changing the bylaws. So a good practice to keep in mind is when it comes to bylaws, less is more. Consider having the bylaws refer to your other operating documents, such as standard operating procedures that can provide additional guidance as needed and which are easier to amend and adapt to your changing needs as a commission. You will also want to set, I'm skipping one. You do need to join the ANC Security Fund as well. Now, one thing that I do want to point out, and we need to update our playbook, is that in the playbook, we mentioned that the security fund is $25. We were notified recently from the auditor that that is going up to $50. It's still an extremely good value. Part of the reason the price is going up is because we've added 6 new commissions, and gone from, I believe, around 296 to 349 single member districts. So there's a need to make the security fund more robust to actually cover the risk. You will also need to set a meeting calendar, which is a calendar that you will share with us. You will put on your website if you have one, that announces the regular meeting schedule of your commission. What I would have you consider is, depending upon where your new commission is located, it would be helpful for you to look at the meeting schedules of the commissions you abut. If you're in an area where there's a number of liquor licenses or significant development where you know you're going to be having a lot of zoning cases, those types of things, when they're on a border, both commissions can weigh in, and both commissions may have great weight. So it's helpful if you can think forward to make sure that your commission is not meeting on the same day of the week, time of the month as the other commission. So should you have to attend the other commission's meeting, you can collaborate. You also need to ensure that you include an open forum in your meeting agenda. There's no set place in the agenda for where it needs to be. Some commissions have it at the beginning of their meeting. Some commissions put it later in the meeting. And there's no guidance as to how long each member of the community can talk. You do have some guidance that you can provide there. If you want members of the community to have a standard 2-minute, 5-minute, however long, you do have some discretion there, but you do have to provide an opportunity for members of the community to provide feedback and comments to the commission that they otherwise would not hear. And there can be no restriction on what the community members choose as their topic. You also need to designate a bank for your ANC bank account. and you need to adopt a budget, what you may do is you may set a means for contacting constituents. So we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about notification. So as I mentioned, some of the logistical things that you may want to start discussing among fellow commissioners that will be making up the new commissions are some of the logistics. Like I said, look for the date and the time, look for location, consider your format. Are there places that would logically be meeting places if you were meeting in person? And you can reach out to those places now. If technology, if you have a local library that is really well wired, that would be an opportunity to develop that relationship now, so that later in the year or whenever you're able to, you could perhaps use that to host a hybrid meeting. Or if you simply want to meet virtually during the first several months, you're allowed to do that. The permanent law does not support virtual meetings, but that has been extended through emergency legislation through, I believe, August. So you are allowed to meet virtually. That does count for attendees, counting towards quorum, and that could be how you may want to start. As I mentioned, you may want to choose who your initial convener is to start the meeting. And you might want to think about accessibility issues, whether they're ADA or language access. And good news for you is if you do need ASL services, this office does have a memorandum of understanding, which simply says you all can fill out the form, you will get the services, and it gets charged in our budget. So it's a pretty simple process. And we also provide other services for language access. So let us know what you need, and we will help you negotiate those issues. So conducting the meetings. First of all, official meetings must be open. And what that means is they must be open to public attendance, or you need to notice people so that they know how to get into your meeting if it's virtual. This requirement is for every official meeting where official action will be taken, where you will have votes that will be binding. Those meetings must be open. You also must have a quorum, which is just a simple majority. So if you have a commission of 11, a simple majority would be 6. If you have a commission of 12, which I don't think we will anymore, then you would need 7, because if there's a tie, you don't have a majority. As stated, notice to the public and a draft agenda are required 7 days prior to the meeting. The agenda does not have to be final. The agenda can be skeletal if that's all the information you have, but you do need to at least provide some kind of agenda to let the community know what they can expect. Transcripts are required when official action is taken. That is pretty easy these days. If you're having a virtual meeting, the recording does count as a transcription. And when official action is taken means if you have it, this extends also to a committee meeting. If the committee is made up of a majority of commissioners and you do anticipate that a vote will be taken. However, if you have a committee meeting where there is not a majority of commissioners for a quorum and you do not take votes, that does not need to be transcribed. Commissioners can meet privately for internal ANC legal or personnel matters. So keep that in mind. And when in doubt, or when not otherwise designated, defer to Robert's Rules of Order to conduct meetings, as I said, when not otherwise provided. So the types of ANC meeting documents, I imagine these might be familiar to some of you and not to others. So we've mentioned the bylaws, standard operating procedures. Now for bylaws, even though I've gone into that, if you want to go into your ANC playbook, there is a link to a model document of bylaws on page 8. We do have a link to a couple of model agendas on page 9. An interesting thing with the agenda, and something that you may want to consider if you have a lot of items on the agenda, is you can have this useful device called a consent agenda, which essentially is where you consider several agenda items together. With one vote, you pass them all. It's typically for things that are non-controversial, like approving the minutes of the previous meeting, or perhaps a letter of support for a group to use a playground. So it's for things that normally take time but are very non-controversial. If you do choose to adopt a consent agenda, always keep in mind that any item on a consent agenda can be removed by any commissioner. So if there's something that's put on there that one of the commissioners says, I want to talk about that, you can do that. It's not a way to upend community dialogue. It's intended to move a number of smaller matters forward in a convenient way. Minutes. We do have a draft of, say, model minutes, or how minutes should look, on page 9 of the playbook. And for resolutions and recommendations, we do have a model resolution that explains some of the parts and how they're formatted through a link on page 10. So getting into money management. As part of your first steps, you might want to decide where to open a bank account, and you do need to approve participation in the security fund. The bank does not need to be in your commission area. It might be helpful, but for those who, or it might even be helpful if you have a bank in your area that has multiple branches that may be close to whomever you choose to be treasurer's place of work. Think about convenience for the commissioners. And with the security fund, as I mentioned, it does need to be considered and passed at the first meeting. You can choose any commercial and FDIC insured bank for ANC accounts, and the bank must sign your security fund paperwork. I want to emphasize here that the security fund, while it may seem like a smaller document, it's extremely important. Until the security fund document is signed and returned and approved, the commission is not able to write checks. So you will have money in your accounts, but you will not be able to spend them until that paperwork is in. So make it a priority. It's not difficult to do, but do make it a priority. In addition to the chair and treasurer, who are typically automatically signers or have the signing authority, decide which officers, in addition to them, you would like to authorize to sign checks. A check will always need to be signed by either the treasurer or the chair, and then one other officer. But if neither the chair nor treasurer are available to sign, you can't write the check. As mentioned earlier, submit your paperwork and signature card to the DC auditor. And this is a good place where I need to remind myself that when you set up your bank account and you decide who you want to be, have the signing authority for your account, when you all go to the bank to get the signature card set up, make sure you take your minutes. The minutes from your January meeting need to include the action that appoints or elects the 4 officer positions. And that document is going to be what the bank uses to verify that you should be on the signature card. So make sure you take that. Some commissions may need a separate EIN in addition to DC's EIN for non-banking purposes if you're intending to hire an employee. However, Many ANCs do not hire employees, and in those situations, they do not need a separate EIN. You also need to adopt your budget. And an important thing to keep in mind is all expenditures must be officially approved by the commission. That is done one of two ways. It's either approved when you adopt your budget, and it's referred to or documented in the budget that you will be spending money on that. That could be a useful thing if you have a recurring bill every month, or it needs to be approved by separate action at an official ANC meeting. So financial reporting. The new commissions are authorized to receive startup funding to cover operations from January to March. Just because I know people are probably interested in more details on that, there is no action you need to take. The money will be deposited in your accounts as soon as we know that you have set up bank accounts and what those account numbers are. And once all your paperwork is in, then the funds will be released and put into your bank account. Now, the size of the startup funding varies a little bit from commission area to commission area. For instance, the new ANC 1E will get $4,819 in startup funds, whereas 3A will get $3,401 in startup funds. The variances are due to population because the way that ANC funding is allocated is by population. So if your commission is slightly larger, perhaps it has an additional SMD, then there's going to be what looks to be an increase in funding over another commission. But when you consider that it's by population, when you break it out by the number of people living in your commission areas, it comes out to pretty close to even, which is the goal. As I mentioned, all expenditures must be authorized by the annual budget or approved during an official meeting. Expenditures must have receipts and supporting documentation. And a monthly treasurer's financial report must be available at each regular ANC meeting. By May, all ANCs will be required to provide the OANC with a quarterly financial report. And for those who may have questions about those, Dawn can go into much detail about the quarterly reports. She's going to be your primary point person, and she's excellent. So if you have a question, she's going to be able to answer it. Which leads into record keeping and grants. So ANCs need to keep copies of agendas, minutes, resolutions, the approved budget, and the quarterly financial reports. You must keep copies of legible financial records, and you must keep copies of records which must be made available to the public upon request. One of the things that we do want to touch upon a little bit is grants. Now, grants is not the primary function of an ANC, nor are ANCs required to give grants, but we know many of them do. So keep in mind, they must serve a public purpose. They must benefit persons who work or reside in the commission area, and they must not fund services already provided by the DC government. If you want to see a much more detailed document providing guidance on grants, you can go to the playbook, and there's a link to the guidelines for grants on page 15. Moving into communication, I do want you to also think about how do you want to engage with your constituents. In addition to required notifications, think about how to effectively communicate with your constituents. And what I mean by that is, for instance, when there's a meeting, you're required to provide notice in one of two ways, or excuse me, in one of four approved ways. And you can just check those boxes and you're good. and you can have your meeting and everything's great. However, checking those boxes doesn't necessarily mean that you've effectively communicated with your constituents or that they know what you're considering. So you may want to look at how do you want to get the information out there so that your neighbors know what you're considering, and so that you can get their opinions above and beyond what is legally required for notice. It's a good opportunity here too for me to talk about. There are 4 ways to do notice for the new commissioners in the first month. The fourth one doesn't really apply so much, which says that the commission is allowed to name the manner in which they want to include in one of their 4 ways. So think about that. Are there forms of communication that you want to officially designate as one of your ways of communicating to provide notice to your neighbors so that they know that there's a meeting? But the other ones are something that you may need to do in January, unless you find an alternative, is posting written notices in at least 4 conspicuous places in each single member district. It can be a lot of work depending upon how large your single member districts are. But I would advise, if you use that as one of your 4 methods, do yourself and everyone a favor and take pictures of the postings once they're up. Having a posting taped to a lamp post 7 days before your meeting is great. But if someone removes it and later you get a comment that they didn't see the notice, you want to be able to show that you did do the appropriate notice. You're also allowed to notice your meetings through publication in a city or community newspaper. Now, we've talked about this a little internally, and due to that requirement when it was drafted and adopted, there is no discussion with regards to format. If there is an online version that presents itself as a newsletter or newspaper and functions as a newsletter or newspaper, we would consider it as such. But we also want to caution that that is not the same thing as a listserv. That is not the same thing as an email distribution group, both of which are fine, but they would be the 3rd way that you can provide notice to your meeting. If you have any questions about that, please let us know. And keep in mind that as you start to getting engaged with your community and you start to get questions from them, depending upon what platform you're using, if you're on a listserv, if you're on Twitter or any other form of social media, it's generally helpful to keep the communications as focused to the issue as possible and as professional as possible, to allow you to be as successful in hearing from everybody that wants to share information with the commission. And it can go a long way in professionalizing the commission, whereby you really can get a lot done. So my advice when it comes to communication is keep it short, keep it professional, and keep it focused, and you'll do fine. And we'll end with help and training, as hopefully you're getting a taste of. By law, each commission is required to take training every year related to ethics and FOIA. We have already reached out to the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability to set up training for, right now, I think we're on target for February. We think it would be helpful to get that up front, have you ask your questions, get you off on a good foot. And also the OANC, we provide assistance, orientation, and training. And our goal is to continually offer training opportunities to all of you throughout the year, both the things we know that are a little bit more difficult to fully learn all the nuances without having worked on some of these cases or issues for years, as well as to address some of the needs that we learn from talking to you every week. So expect to see a lot of training. We will let you know when something is required versus when something is advisable, and you can decide from there how to engage.